and good morning. We welcome you to Brothers Market in beautiful downtown Sigourney on a December morning here in Brothers Market. Again, Sigourney, Iowa for the sports section. And as you can see there with the title along the bottom, we've got a special edition. We've been talking about this one for a while. Looking forward to having Coach Bob Howard back in Sigourney, recently announcing his retirement. We're going to bring Coach Howard up here momentarily. First, we start with the gang of Alan, Bruce, and Rick. Guys, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Welcome this morning. Before we get started here with Coach Howard, we will just let Rick give us a little spiel here.
Well, welcome to Brothers. It looks like there's an audience standing back there. Some of these guys that have probably had a connection with Coach Howard out there somehow, some way. So it's going to be exciting. It's a big day at the store. There's lots of specials going on as the Big Ten title game tonight. So come in, get your ground beef, all your Smokies, all that kind of stuff. Come in here, and adult beverages are ready in the corner. Whatever else you need, and
fire up that app.
Your melons are gone from this section, so you got to buy the donuts over here now. So we got our fresh made donuts here in the corner. So come on in, check out this show today, and it's also Go Hawks. So
all right, thanks, Rick. We'll see you at the end of the show.
Thanks, Rick.
All right, Rick Landgrebe, the manager of Brothers Market here in downtown Sigourney. Yes, we do have a little bit of a crowd here at Brothers Market, but you can get in here and do your grocery shopping this morning. Just walk on by and maybe hang out for a little while and watch the show. But if you don't mind, let's bring in the man of the hour. Literally, we're going to have an hour with Coach Howard till 9 o'clock this morning. If you want to put your hands together, guys, let's bring in Mr. Coach Bob Howard to the Sports Section Coaches Show here on Steve Shetler Media. Coach Howard, good to have you.
Well, we'll see how good it is to have me. No, I sure appreciate it. This is honestly a day I've been dreading for 45 years. And first of all, I never, ever have used the word retire with anything that was associated with this 2 weeks ago Wednesday when it come out up there. But we'll see. It was certainly fun to come back to Sigourney, and it's also really bittersweet. So I really appreciate the offer and the guys that have come out here to be part of this.
Thanks, Coach, for coming in here today. Coach Howard was first came here in 1980, and he left here in 2006. Just for the SK program, he complied a record of 180 wins and 34 losses, and I guess I'm pretty proud to say I was part of that too. So thanks a lot, Coach, on that. I guess I'm going to kind of break the ice here, Steve, and my first question here for Coach Howard is, what's the biggest fish you've ever caught?
Well, the longest one was a 30 and a quarter inch. Now, what species are we talking? Walleyes, a 30 and a quarter inch, really skinny walleye, July 3rd. It was probably 2003 off of the second hump at South Fork at Rathbun. The biggest one was one of the years we didn't make the playoffs in 2008 at Webster City, and the retired superintendent and I went to Rainy River, and she was 29 and a quarter, but she weighed 13 and a half pounds, and in the spring full of eggs, she would have been a really nice. Unfortunately, she isn't laying eggs anymore because that's on my white trash wall right above my 65-inch television with the paint peeling off the ceiling and the dog stains on the carpet. It should be a trailer house, which would be fine with the dog. So that's the biggest walleye I've caught. So.
All right, that sounds good.
Speaking of which, I'm going to interrupt. I've got Eddie Conrad, Ed Conrad's son, Eddie. He's helping me out on color commentary, play-by-play announcing for the Keota Eagles basketball coverage. Eddie was telling me a story just last night about how you guys were ice fishing one time, and you basically smashed through the ice and pulled a bass out of the water. Do you remember that story?
I don't remember that. And I can't believe that a son of Ed Conrad's would make up a story like that. And very seldom did we fish for bass through the ice. So, but it could have happened. I don't know.
All right. Coach, let's go back to 1980. And if you can just kind of tell us how'd you end up in Sigourney, what it was like your first year of Sigourney.
Well, first of all, I interviewed 3 times at Humboldt that year, which is now arguably Webster City's biggest rival. And the superintendent wanted a pro football player to be their head coach, and they hired him, which was fine. And I ended up being really good friends with Dan McClanahan, too, in the future, but also at the same time interviewed at Sigourney. And remember, and that was Craig Downing was the superintendent at that time, and part of the interview and quite a bit of the time I spent was with Coach Smith, and Mike Mateer and Don Baldus, and got to meet them really well. And then fortunately, between the Humboldt and the Sigourney job, which turned into obviously Sigourney Keota, I think probably God was looking out for somebody and got me the right one. And Humboldt would have been okay too, but the main reason I wanted Humboldt, to be perfectly honest, was the West Fork, the Des Moines River goes through there, and there's a really good low-head dam, and the fishing is really good in through there. And I like north central Iowa because it's flat and on all the county roads, but it was the right move for sure.
I guess kind of tell us about those first 7 years there at Sigourney when we were just Sigourney, just about some of the teams that kind of bring back some memories maybe.
Well, certainly the first team, and I hate even mentioning people like in that Facebook deal that we did with Adam Sellers there during COVID where we tried to relive each season. I hate leaving people out, but that first team, 1980, had Marty Kerr at quarterback and Terry Wachter and Danny Horace. They were in the backfield, and I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to keep mentioning people and miss them. But it was a very big learning experience for a really fantastic coach from Scranton who knew everything. And what I really know now is I had 4 kids on that Scranton team that legitimately ran 4.5 40s. We didn't have a weight in the school. We didn't do anything. Back then, you couldn't work with kids in the off season anyway, which I wish it was still that way, to be honest. But people would find a way around it. So obviously, that is out the door. But I learned a lot from Coach Smith, and just how to behave, how to act on the field, how to expect to win. And if you don't win, if you play well, that's the main thing. And we ended up 5-4. And if I would have known anything and not had the ego I had, I wouldn't have changed one bit of the offense that Coach Henry ran the year before, because that's all those kids knew. And that was the problem. And I remember the last play of that 1980 season was at Iowa Valley, and they were always really good back then. We drove the length of the field, and they hadn't been coached not to do this. Nowadays, it would probably be legal. Danny Horace ran up on a quarterback sneak, put both hands on Marty's back, and shoved him into the end zone, and they called it. And it was a 15-yard penalty, and we lost that game 15-14, and we were 5-4 instead of 6-3. From there, that next year was Brian Holt, it wasn't Brian Holt. See, that's where I shouldn't be mentioning names. It was Orland Walker and his group. They were 7-2, then 6-3. Then 1983 was kind of we moved forward. We beat one of the, because Clint always asked me, what was your favorite game? I said, well, one of the favorite football games was 1983 when we beat Williamsburg 13-0, and they looked like Central or College or Wartburg. They were huge. And they were really good, and they were undefeated when they came here, and we beat them 13-0. And that was Danny House and the kids that were going to be seniors the next year. The first time we went for the playoffs with me would have been Pat Margette, Brian Holt, Brian Striegel, Dave McLaughlin. That group, they were juniors then, and that was a big win. So those first few years, and that was the first time in '84 we got to play at the pit at Mount Vernon too, and they beat us by a field goal. But that was kind of whom I thought started being consistently a threat to be in the playoffs every year, and and we'd won the conference in '83 too. So anyway, and I'm leaving stuff out, but.
And going on from there, from '84, '83, what made you decide to put the single wing in '87? I've always wondered that.
Well,
just because of the talent you had on that '83, '84, '85.
Well, the '86 group, and what was our record? 7-2, maybe something like that. Bill House had been was our quarterback. And the year before, it had been Pat Herman, Kirk Kaler, Jeff Walrick. That was the backfield, and we ran some wishbone type stuff. And I always wanted to have a different offense. I always wanted to have an identity and be different. And we were going to play Iowa Valley because the schedule flipped around. We were going to play Iowa Valley the first game of the season. And they were really good. And a kid named Zuber, who went and ran hurdles at Arizona, who still may have the class 1A or A, whatever the small class is, record for high hurdles. He's like a 14-2 hurdler, and he averaged like 27 or 28 yards a punt return the first 2 years. So we never had a soap game, but we always had the scrimmage, and everybody always scouted each other, even though they weren't necessarily supposed to. And we ran the wishbone during that soap game, and we looked like Oklahoma. Billy House looked like Jamil Holloway running up and down the field. We scripted everything so the defense would stun so we had holes, because I didn't want anybody getting tackled. But Iowa Valley scouted us, and we had put the single wing in the parking lot at Central Football Camp that summer, back before air conditioning, and the kids really weren't too crazy about this because we did it right after dinner, and it was probably 90 degrees, and we did it on a nice concrete parking lot. And I remember Joe Parcell, Greg Greiner, and Tim Heisdorfer said, "Yeah, sure, we're going to run this for about a week," because I was always looking for something different to do, and obviously it worked. Part of it worked in that game. Brady Brown went 72 or 73 yards, second play on the game on a 430. I think we still called it 432, but it's 432 crisscross. It's an inside handoff off the power play. They had no idea where he was at, and then we held on. And we quick kicked 3 times, and I remember the rumbling from the crowd when we kick on third down. But he never got to return a punt, and a couple of those rolled and rolled. I know 2 of them went inside to their 15, and by the time they got back up to midfield, they'd screw up. They'd have a penalty. They weren't able to drive that far, and we hit 2 really big jump passes. Ben Henriksen was the spin back, and he hit a couple big jump passes. And then the rest of the year, we kept getting better, and then Ben blew his knee up at BGM, and Billy went to spin back. And then we got to play West Liberty in the playoffs with a guy named John Hostendorf at the running back. And I never forget, C.C. Hoffman was one of our corners. Well, C.C. Hoffman, I don't know what the weight was then. I don't think he was 98. It was probably the next weight up. He wasn't very big. Hostendorf was probably 6'4", 225, and CC tackled him a couple of times. I also remember him hurdling CC literally right in front of our bench and going 40 yards. I forget what they beat us, but that was the first time we went to playoffs. That was also the first year of Sigourney Keota football. And Lee Dua was the first starter from Keota after Ben got hurt, and Lee come in and played tailback and stuff for us, and a very significant. And once again, I hate forgetting guys, and I already forgot 2 guys that I see standing back here, because I know one of the guys from that Hog Squad was Tony, and Charles Sellers was on that '84 team, and so I'm already forgetting people, and I pre-apologize for that, for forgetting guys, but that was a big deal. Putting Sigourney and Keota together was a huge deal. And not real well received all the way across the board by a lot of people other than the kids. And Billy House and Greg Greiner and Tim Heisdorfer went with me to Keota the afternoon after the principal had told me we were going to do this. There wasn't any asking, and we were sharing superintendents with Keota at that time, Keith Sassine, and they didn't have enough kids. And Mark Greiner and Brett Bell were the two freshmen that came out that first year, and they took a lot of static, a lot of crap, and they stayed with it, and they both ended up being fantastic players on that 90 team. That regardless of what the results of the Sigourney-Keota greatest football poll that Adam did to begin with, I still think that 90 team was one of the best teams we had. I mean, they didn't make the playoffs because the coach screwed up, because I had too big of an ego in 1990, and when we had the car wreck and the center, Nathan Connor, tore his ear, and nowadays he would have still probably got to play. He couldn't wear a helmet for a week, and it was peaking. And not that my good friend Tom Stone would have figured out anything, but they managed to play a game before us. And they played Wapello, and they had penalties, and they had fumbles and all that. They were our first game. And it looked like our first game, especially when I was too arrogant not to run single wing. And we had a couple fumbles. And Chad Menster, bless his heart for what he turned out being, that was his first game he ever played. He was our punter. We set up a fake punt, and I've never run one since, ever. We don't even practice them. Our coaches always want, hey, let's put. I said, no, we ain't putting any fakes in. I said, if we need to punt that bad, we'll punt on third down or we'll go for it. But anyway, Chad literally threw the ball over Greg Patzner's head up onto the track. Went right over my head. But that was on, I think, our 41-yard line. They converted 2 fourth downs on that possession. They beat us 7-6. Anyway, I don't know why I went into that story. So that's going to be the problem with this. I'll go the whole hour. So
I think
that's
every
enough.
question will be at least 15
And
minutes.
we'll sit here and listen to every answer.
No, it won't. I will cut it down. So, but no, that's where single wing started. And I've told the kids at Webster City, and they've watched almost all the stuff that Adams put on YouTube. They've watched, a lot of that stuff, and they honestly have watched Derek Greiner's speech over and over and over that he gave at that reception. You can hardly hear any of it now. It's so, and like I can't swear on it. I did a really stupid thing. I had boxes and boxes of videotapes, and Clint said when we first went, you need to get all these digitized. Oh, I'll get to it. They're still sitting in the garage, and to me, I've only been up there that long. Well, it's been 17 years, and I dug them out here a couple years ago, and they're all. Plus, where are you going to watch them now? You don't have any VHS players, but anyway, I've lost his speech other than it is on YouTube. But if you really listen, you can hear it. But the Sigourney-Keota kids have listened to all that, or the Webster City kids have watched all that Sigourney-Keota stuff. They've watched when Coach Jensen's team played in there too, a couple of years ago when they played DeJean and those guys. So it's anyway. I'm going to shut up, okay? Because I'm sure I'm going to get back to some of this stuff once your questions start.
No, on following that too, Coach. The first year he went up to Webster City, were the kids pretty excited to run single wing, or just a change, or did they buy in? Or
well, they bought in because they didn't have any choice, and I was the AD as well, and unfortunately they hadn't won very many games for 10 years, and so they were willing to listen to about anything, I guess. And we did all right to start with, and then Humboldt had won the state the year before, and they had about half their kids back. And I don't know that they overlooked us because Greg Thomas is a very good friend of mine. He kind of actually replaced Ed as one of, because Ed and I were fairly close. But anyway, we beat them at homecoming. And we beat them because of the single wing. I mean, but then it took off, and it's still. I don't know that it's the identity up there like it is here, okay, and still is, which is so awesome. But like I've said, who's going to be the new coach at Webster City? We don't know. I think we know, but if it isn't somebody who's going to have Clint Howard still coach with them, and they're going to come in and they're going to run the stuff they watch on television, they don't have a quarterback and they don't have any receivers. There's a couple kids that you could develop maybe, and our schedule is really tough. So, and it's going to get worse next year. But anyway, and I don't even remember what the question. Oh, did they receive it? Yeah, they received it. And John Naughton was still working for the Register, and he come up and did a great big story before the season started. Says, you might want to wait and see. And we all, New Hampton was ranked that year. We played them first, and I think we had 390 yards or something. They beat us because we blew a screen pass at the end that they scored on. But then we came back to earth because Eagle Grove pounded us the next week. So it was a learning process for sure. But it's nowadays, and it's kind of an old saying, and I'm name dropping whatnot. These some guys will know the name, but Coach Darlington in Florida is kind of a nationally famous single wing guy, and he's always said, if you are better than other people, then fine. If you aren't better than somebody else, you better be different. If you can be different and better, then you got a pretty good chance. And that's where we were at in 2001 and 2005. And I'm not sure we were better in 1995, that first state championship, playing against Vanden Bosch and Woods and those guys. That team, I hope we'll get to them, because that was the greatest example of mental preparation and visualization and expecting to win that I've ever been around. But yeah.
So you mentioned Clint there, Coach. I know a lot of dads want to coach their kids, but what's the dynamic like coaching with your son?
Oh, with him?
Yes.
Other than keeping him off the field and keeping him back and trying to keep his mouth shut. Other than that, it's been great because I don't have to mess with him. I mean, we could put the backs with him, and he knew how to teach that, and he was a defensive backs coach, and yeah, that's been fun. And this is great, but he's kind of Mr. Mom now. He's got 4 little kids, birthday party for 2 of them is tomorrow, and I think they're going to be 12, 10, 9, or 12, 10, 8, and 6, and now they are in all the obligatory youth sports stuff, and he hardly has time to do anything, So it's been more fun coaching with him than it was coaching him, and there was no problems when I coached him, except I could have done a lot better for him, because I made an example out of him every time we turned around, and he knew what I was doing, but the rest of the kids, they really thought I was a jerk the way I treated Clint. And what Clint was like when he came here as a freshman to what he was like when he was a senior is one of the greatest examples of if you can wait and not be tired by waiting. And because when he was here when he was a freshman, who would have ever thought he was going to be third team All-State when he was a senior? But it was weight room and probably not having any choice, because I didn't give him a lot of choice. But anyway, I hope that answered the question. But
on that note, with the grandkids, are you Grandpa, Papa, Grandpa Howard? What do they call you?
I have no idea what the oldest girl calls me when I'm not around. Well, she's probably called it to me in my face too, Papa, I guess. But it's that's a whole different dynamic. And I'm probably in the doghouse right now because there are 4, because it's 2 different girls on 2 different teams, 4 youth basketball games today at 2 different places, and a volleyball tournament. And I'm okay at the flag football stuff when I can stand away from everybody else. I'm not real good sitting with the experts and listening and listening to this. And that's going to be a really huge challenge. The very first youth girls basketball tournament I went to 2 years ago, I got into it. I couldn't. Now, if Clint would have done that, I could have believed it, but because he's a lot like his mom. But me, I thought I was pretty tame, and this guy next to me is ripping on all the refs. And I said, "Man," I says, "this must have been awesome when you coached in the Olympics." And he didn't think a lot of that, and he did end up fortunately leaving. And Clint says, how close? I said, I don't know, but I was figuring you were going to get involved sooner or later, and I wasn't going to have to do anything. I said, he wasn't going to physically do anything, was he? And he said, well, I hope not. He was older than you are. So anyway.
I've got a couple questions from some of the guys here. One just to check in here. I know he's watching right now. Is Jeremy Guile out in Marietta, California? And I'll tell you what, Coach, I don't know if they get much tougher than that kid.
He could still play.
Yeah.
Well, since he ain't here, should I
know he's watching.
I'm not going to insult Jeremy Guile because shoot, he could drive out here just to. No, what a great story, and guys like Jeremy that have served the country, like Will over here, Will Hanchett and Heath. And the guys and we had a lot of guys off that 2001 team, because that was still when you were going to go get your college paid for. You're going to get pretty good money. And I think National Guard was in our building right outside my office probably 2 or 3 times a week. And then 9/11 hit, and all of a sudden it got really real quick. And just a little bit of a story. I'm going to keep it short. I was one of those coaches. Oh, hey, we're going to win this battle. This is like war. I haven't used the term "go to battle" or "we're going to go to war." It isn't battle and it isn't war. And I'm not trying to embarrass him, but Will is one of the ones that I talk to. And say, well, Coach, it is important. Well, yeah, it's important. Maybe it's the most important thing you do in high school. This ain't the biggest thing that's ever going to happen. And the other stuff. And now, of course, John's story, John McLaughlin, and what happened with him, and that was 2016, and our 2016 team was involved with praying for John, and they learned all about John. They watched him on YouTube. John came up to one of our summer practices to see me and Clint the day before he went back after he rehabbed. And when we were doing speed training and some of the seniors were still there, and when he got out of the car and started across the parking lot, their eyes got big, and one of them said, is that McLaughlin? I said, yeah, that's John McLaughlin. Why don't you run over there, slap him on the head, and tell him how tough you are? But certainly, Jeremy Guile, I mean, I'm so proud of what Jeremy did and the great career he had in the Marines, and I'm not taking any credit for this, and I'm probably going to get this story wrong because it came from Roy, but it was about when they got back on the bus from football practice and Jeremy gets off and destroys somebody's moped because he was pissed at him. I mean, Jeremy was a really intense, tough kid. I never had one. We never had any issues with Jeremy, and obviously the career he had in the Marines shows the discipline and stuff that he was capable of, and a very, very big injury that happened his senior year when he broke his collarbone up at Mount Vernon when I don't know what we had, 400 and some yards rushing against the team that was going to go win the state 2 weeks later, and gave up 3 first downs in that game. But Jeremy broke his collarbone. And Ryan Schaff, then I think he was a sophomore, I think that year, and he ended up at tailback then. But anyway, a lot of respect for Jeremy, and that's awesome that that he took the time to say something. So thank you, Jeremy.
A question too from Adam Sellers: how and why did we start the Hells Bells?
Well, that was the 1995 kids. We started in 95, and that was, and I'm going to leave out one of them too, and I'll start with Dustin Dobbins. But Dustin, Tim Flynn, Greg Hammes, Todd Heisdorfer, the guys that worked for Hammes Construction, and they would work all day. And I forget at that time whether I was coaching baseball or softball. It was one or the other, and we'd have practices, whatever, and then we'd keep the open gym and wait, and I'd wait for them to show up to weight train, and they would come in and lift in their work boots, their work clothes, in the at that time it was the new wrestling multi-purpose room. Before that, and some of the guys here were involved in this, rolling the weights out of that little equipment room and taking them out and lift them in the yard is where But those guys would play that heavy metal stuff at night. Of course, I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure it was Dustin that, Coach, we need to play some we ain't playing this crap. And they played Hell's Bells, and I said, if you make a cut of this and stop it when the singing starts, and just play the bells, and boy, what a tradition that got to be. I mean, it's awesome. We play the bells at Webster City. It's not quite the same as having somebody watching out the press box at Sigourney and signaling me when the time is, and then when we would come out of that at the doors there, the new building by the weight room, then they'd start the bells and you walk across there. I mean, it got to be so cool, and it still is. And they wanted to stop it at Webster City 2 or 3 years ago because, well, we don't have the rights to play that. I said, well, when somebody shows up that knows anything about it and they actually are going to file some problem, then maybe we'll stop it. But we come out, we've got a team room right there by the field that when Hell's Bells comes on, then the garage door goes up and we go running out, and of course we've had 2 or 3 times we run out, somebody falls down right away, which isn't nearly as bad as jumping off that track when the old days with the bank, because I remember we lost J.D. Griner one year jumping off that dang thing, and he blew a knee. So anyway, that's when Hell's Bells started, and it really got to be pretty dang cool. And they started trying to use it for a bunch of other stuff at Webster City, and I said, you do that, and we'll stop using it. And that was right after I got done being AD. Then they were going to use it for others. No, you're not. So.
And then another question, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, from Nathan Wood. He wanted me to ask you if you remembered the 911, something to do with that practice. You stopped practice, and we'd already kind of talked about it before it even happened. Whether we should have even been practicing, I don't know. But we were going to play West Burlington that week, and we'd already agreed we were going to play the game. And then, of course, it was eerie as heck, and nobody knew what was going to go on, and no planes were flying. And about that, and I don't know, it was midway through the practice, and way up there was like 2 or 3, and probably could have Will tell the story, but there was 2 or 3 fighter jets, or maybe more than that. And I think we stopped, and I said, hey, guys, there's a good chance. And about then you see the great big, and it turns out it was Air Force One. And the neater part of that story is President Bush had flown from Florida, where he was, to Offutt Air Force Base, because at that time they didn't know if we were going to get attacked or whatever. And then that afternoon, he left Offutt to go back to Washington, D.C. Chad Menster was a Secret Service agent stationed at Offutt, and he was on that plane. And I get choked up thinking, I mean, this was cool. Cool without being cool, because 911 was horrible. But that was one of the really significant things that happened in 2001. That team went through a lot of stuff, with Clint Cavan and being during 911, and the guys that had enlisted and knew that they were probably going to be going somewhere at some time, and then of course winning the state. I mean, it was just that was quite a year.
Alan, should we open it up to the audience?
Say,
if any of you guys have a question, come on up and just ask your question or your topic. Is everybody going to be camera shy? There we go. We got somebody coming up here.
All right, quick question, and Coach Howard's pretty humble about things. He talked about Coach Darlington being a national figure in single wing, but he probably doesn't mention he's in the Hall of Fame. He speaks nationally about the single wing, and you talked about the first year you ran it, but like, who did you go to learn about the single wing? Did you run single wing when you were younger? Like, where did you get the background? And if you've ever sat in a teacher's meeting with Coach Howard, you know that all he's doing is drawing plays. If I can only imagine how many notepads this guy has of single wing plays.
Oh, well, thank you, Eric, and thanks for coming all the way down here from Mason City to do this, to ask that question. But the second part of that is I have not drawn a play for the last 3 weeks, and if you want to talk about addictions, I probably go through 5 or 6 80-page, because I have to get the good stuff, or otherwise the fountain pens bleed through it, because I like fountain pens. Both sides a month drawing plate. I haven't drawn a plate since, and boy, and that clipboard's right there, and it's really hard. But I said, I'm not going to do this. You know, I've got to wean off of this somehow. And there's another part of that story. I'm not going to go into that, or it'll take forever, about the PlayStation I just bought with Madden on it. But as far, we ran single wing in high school because my coach, who is one of the greatest men I've ever been around, not necessarily one of the greatest coaches I've ever been around, but he was a great guy. He went to class with John Aldridge at the UNI, at the UNI Teachers College, and he'd seen single wing. So we ran it. Now, I played when I was a freshman. We were 5-4, 3-6, 2-7, 1-8. But we led the state in, or led our conference, which at that time was Adel, Norwalk, Woodward Granger, who was the mythical state champ in their class back then. We averaged 400 yards a game rushing. We gave up 600 yards a game of offense, and that was before the 50-point rule. And I remember one game where we were always supposed to run a wedge the very first play, and that was when Coach Lowry had the brilliant idea that our biggest player and fastest player should play spin back. Well, we averaged about 155 with me in the line, weighing 240. He puts me at spin back for a game and 2 plays. I averaged about 2 yards a carry. It's a wonder I didn't lose both knees from getting hit. But anyway, we played Adel. We're supposed to run wedge because it was our tradition. Well, everybody knew we run wedge. And I told my best friend, go right down the middle of the field. What? I said, because I'm going to throw it to you. Coach Lowry will never. Well, no, he was right. Coach Lowry didn't like it, but it was a 73-yard jump pass for a touchdown. And I kicked the extra point. I kicked off, and then I came out of the game, switched back to number 74, and that was the end of me getting to call plays and play spin back. So, but that's where I saw single wing, and we played with it at Scranton. And if we would have ran it at Scranton, we might have been a Final Four team. That may be the best backfield up till the last couple of years. And we had the 2001, 2000. We've had great backfields here. But the one at Scranton that had the 4 kids that ran the 4.5s, we'd run it when we were way ahead. And back to the 87 story, had it not worked at Iowa Valley, I probably wouldn't be sitting right here now talking to anybody, because I can imagine what was getting said in the bleachers. But first of all, it takes the experts a while to figure out what you're doing, that it's not what everybody else is doing. And now, of course, we still have reporters from other schools call it Wildcat. Well, yeah. No, Wildcat is single wing, the stuff the guys do on television. So anyway, did that answer that question, Eric? And we certainly have changed it a bunch from then. And I mean, Coach Smith had Coach Aldridge. Coach Smith student taught under Coach Aldridge at UNI Teachers College. And Coach Aldridge came down here. Well, we were already running it, and he started telling me how we were doing it wrong. Well, I said, well, that's fine. Well, we're not necessarily, well, this isn't the way we do it. Well, and they only ran one formation, and boy, when we started, I don't know what year it was, we put the wing back up, brought him in motion, and it was the greatest. And John was from Connecticut, and he'd been in Iowa for 40 years, and I used to haul him to clinics. Why, he still talked like a New Englander. He said, that's the greatest bastardization of the single wing I've ever seen. I said, oh. He said, you're an innovator. I said, not an innovator. I saw it in a book in Coach Skipper's office from the 1940s. And then we started snapping between the legs. Well, yeah, I would like to say I invented that. Biggie Munn at Michigan State ran that back in the 1940s. But so anyway, that's I'm taking all the time on one story.
That's pretty average. Coach Lamb, do you have any questions? Sigourney-Pekin rivalries?
I just always remembered, I don't know Coach Howard that well, but I always remember, I guess the thing that brings back memories in my career from the backyard brawl or whatever you want to call it is the friendship between you and Tom then and now, and how it reminded me of competing against my brother, and not just the respect, but and that added to that rivalry because you guys thought so much of each other, and win, lose, or draw, it was always a special night. I guess for me as a coach, that was always very special to see that at the end of the game, you and Tom, how close you were, and yet you could still compete and make such a rivalry out of that, and be such good friends. And so I tip my hat. Congratulations, Coach.
Well, thank you. And I can tell a lot of Coach Stone stories, starting with him sticking about a 3-pound catfish into my leg when he threw it at the live well, missed, and it bounced, and literally the pectoral fin stuck in the side of my leg over at Red Rock. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I missed. But Tom started out as a mentor because Tom was about 10 years older. Our connection was Central College and Coach Skipper. And I remember going to Tom 2 or 3 times about good conduct, how you handle good conduct, how you do this. And he's a great, was a great man, great coach. And we only beat him once. And what I also remember about him was he managed to make sure we didn't play some of the years when we were loaded. And when he managed to get the Wapello game in 1990 in ahead of our first game. And that wasn't all him, but no, it was awesome. And there in well, it would have been, what year was that? Clint's senior, I don't know, maybe his junior. It was his junior year when we scored, and then the kid went down the middle, and Joe Iben shoestringed him, and I think we beat him 16-15 or something. But yeah, it was great relationships. I knew Brian well, and Willie, and their mom, and it was a great relationship. Plus, it taught me you do not have to hate your opponents. Now, you might hate getting beat by them but you don't have to have that relationship coaching. And I think now when you watch all the stuff on TV and all that, and that's always kind of been there. But him, Ed Thomas, Dwayne Twait, those guys kind of taught at that time a young coach, maybe you don't have to be that way. So thank you.
Okay, Coach, just another question here that I got for you is, so you've coached in 6 different decades. And I know you started out when I was 5 years old, but
well, thank you.
What just over the 6 decades, what changes have you seen? The weights, the media, scouting with the huddle, rule changes, coaching the kids.
I will keep this. No, I promise. And if it goes past a couple minutes, you shut me up. 2 things. And this is part of why I have resigned, and I didn't resign for any other reason than really high blood pressure, a lot of stress, and frustration of not being able to control things. That's one of the things that's really changed is social media and the internet. And when you tie those with poorly done youth sports, and I pay attention to Sigourney Keota all the time, and I watch. I think what's being done here, because you guys are tied with Coach Jensen, and I hope people from Webster City are watching it. Webster City is not that situation. I haven't had any influence over 5th and 6th grade football for the last 10 years, and we've managed to win in spite of it. And we've got a lot of problems, with that 5% of the lunatics who. First of all, the first youth sport that I think really started changing things was club volleyball, where parents with girls that are going to be 5'1" and 5'2" need to specialize, play year-round, because they're going to go be D1 volleyball players on scholarships, and that's in all the sports now. And most people are fine. Most people just want the kids to have fun. They want them to learn something. But for sure with boys, and Clint Howard's one of the best examples, when he was in – when he was in 7th and 8th grade before he moved here, I drove the 162.5 miles to Audubon 2 or 3 times a summer to watch him play Little League, his 1/2 inning in right field. He was that kid. and he wasn't going to go out for anything had he stayed in Audubon, to be honest. And now it's like 74% of all 14-year-olds who have played youth sports don't play in junior high. And that may not be in every school. It is in ours, and it's that. So youth sports and social media where you can't control anything. Now, when I was here, that last 4 or 5 years, and I was writing all the articles that went in the paper, we had basically my own radio show. I controlled everything, but there wasn't internet. Now the reporters and stuff, they directly call the kids, and you have no idea what's going on. The culture we had at Sigourney Keota, and I think it is still here, that is awesome. And I knew what I was leaving. It was just time for me to change, and the kids needed a change. And so anyway, that's the two biggest things. So, and I figured that was going to get answered: social media and youth sports. And I am all for youth sports if they're done right. I mean, that's.
So you've coached football long time. And I know when you were in Sigourney, you coached a lot of other sports. I'm sure you did at Webster City too. Other than football, what was your other favorite sport to coach?
Whatever. Well, I was going to say whatever's in season. Good softball. And it really, for lack of a better word, pisses Clint off. Well, because he won't even ask me now. What was your? I said, well, that's easy. The 1-0 11-inning softball game when we beat Durant to go to state. When Steph and those girls were playing. Well, not that. I said, okay. Then when we beat Montezuma in basketball 72-70, when they were winning the state, and Menster and Kaufman and Tommy Herman and those guys, we beat them in our gym 72-70. And that game started off with 10 free throws because some fool put the wrong numbers in the scorebook. And each one of those was a technical foul. So, no, I loved coaching baseball, softball, track was if it was a favorite, because track there wasn't much stress. I mean that was, and we were usually pretty good in everything from the 400 down, because most kids wouldn't do distance stuff, but we were always pretty darn good in the sprints. And probably my biggest regret came during track season. I was trying to think on the way down. I don't know if Will was on that 4x1 team that I screwed up and was sitting in my office at 3 p.m. to enter us for Drake Relays, and it was Saturday, and I didn't get us into Drake Relays. I know Johnny Walrick was on that team, and Trent was on that team. I don't know who else was running on that year, but I screwed us out of going to the Drake Relays. But no, track was a blast. It was a little irritating taking the grills and stuff down to Cardinal, because that was a little brazen, kind of rubbing it into the other teams that we're down here on having a picnic. But no, when I started coaching, it was all about football. The longer I coached, the more it was about coaching. And one of the biggest deals to me was when I came, well, you've got to coach girls basketball too. Okay. Well, really? I said, well, yeah. Well, I didn't quite know what I was getting into at that time for what it had been like. And I think our first 500 season, I think, was 1982 or 83. It was Deanne Fogel and that group. And then the reason I stayed in Sigourney, because Madrid made a really big appeal in 1987 before Randy Hinkle was hired to come back, and I never would have went there because my dad would have shot somebody uptown as soon as they criticized me. I mean, which would have happened immediately. But who I promised I wasn't going to leave, and I just had the meeting with him a week before, was Beth Ward, Chris Frank, and Amy Carey, and the girls team that won the conference that next season. And I will never forget them coming to my office. We want to know why you don't yell at us like you yell at the boys. I said, well, first of all, what do you consider yelling? I said, do I ever yell at them personally? Well, probably. I said, no, not probably, because that's one thing I'm kind of proud of. I don't think I've ever blamed a kid for, well, you're a dummy, you lost this, you know, and I haven't really done that. Well, yeah, you got more excited. I said, well, and at that time I had Amos, my first bulldog, And I said, I can take Amos out and we can go pheasant hunting. He probably isn't going to sit too many pheasants because he hasn't done a dang thing to be trained for it. You guys don't do anything in the off season. I said, well, you've never told it. I said, well, if I got to tell you to. And that summer, who I had to kick out of the gym was the girls. And it obviously made a difference. And I guess I always wanted to have at least one girl sport, usually had two. Because and then that way, of course, they always said football got everything anyway, no matter what, but we treated them all the same, I think. At least in my mind, we treated them all the same, and we expected the same thing out of the girls we did out of the boys. And at the start, it was all about numbers. I wanted to be the youngest coach to do this. I wanted to be the youngest to win 100, the youngest to get to 150, the youngest I was. Who cares? And that Hall of Fame thing that was back in 1995, that was a heck of a trip in the car to go up that night with Roy and Clint. And I sure wasn't thinking about going in the Hall of Fame. We were playing West Lyon the next morning, and I remember going up through that road through Belle Plaine and up that way. And Roy said, "You want me to drive?" And I says, "No, we ain't got time." And I usually don't speed. But back then, that was such a big deal. Well, that was 30 years ago. And that stuff's all done. And the longer you win, it was more about, and I'm not going to try to embarrass anybody. Well, and if it does, it does. When Charles Sellers and Tony Pitch show up at Creston, 3 hours from here for our playoff game, and they've come to Sigourney, and there's been a lot of other guys, that have come to our games. That's why you coach. And this kind of thing, I guess, is why you coach. And to me, this is about Sigourney and Sigourney Keota. It ain't about Bob Howard. I was very fortunate that I think God gave me a really thick skin, a really big ego, where I could take criticism, and I didn't. And I wish everybody loved you and everybody thought you were great, but that was never that doesn't happen. And I was able to be in places where I had kids that would buy in, and we could have success. And we had a really good sports writer, Troy Banning, up there that's at Gilbert now, but he was always about, I said, yeah, my teams that I've been on the sideline with have won 370 some games or 60. I ain't played in any of them. I said, it's a good dang thing that I don't have to play. So it's very cliche, but it's about the kids and about relationships. That's why you coach. And I really wanted to get 3 more years because I wanted to get to 50. And I may still. I mean, that's my goal right now. The second grader, it's 5 years, and he'll be in 7th grade, so we'll see if I want to come back. I can't see me coaching 7th graders, but I coached junior high basketball here a couple years. That got me back into the high school really, really fast. Because back then they didn't care who I was, and they didn't know I was such a big deal, and they sure don't now. So, but it's about relationships and kids, and I considered myself, and I know all the notoriety was about football, but I considered myself as much about the girls' basketball and softball. It was the whole athletic department together, because the reason Ed Thomas and I'll shut up about this, we went to Emmitsburg and met with Dwayne Twait back when he was in his heyday, and we didn't go about football. He was training boys and girls the same together, and speed training and weight room. And we didn't have room for everybody to be in there all at once, but we all did. The girls did the same thing the boys did. So if me and Coach Sellers offered you to come back to our junior high football in Sigourney Keota to get your 3 years, you'd say no? If you'll buy my house.
How much you want for it?
Well,
I'll just tell my wife it's a summer home.
You definitely want to go in it before you offer to pay anything, because when I went there, I had the 2 bulldogs that I left here with, plus Clint's Wiesla, and now the new half pit bull that's in there, it's a dog pen. So anyway,
I think I could just put a sign in the yard of Bob Howard's home and sell tickets. It'd probably pay for itself.
up there,
Do some tours.
we'll see.
Well, I'll get all the Sigourney Kyoto people to come up and see it.
That would be that maybe be more.
I got a quick question.
Yes.
Of course, so from my time with you, with boys basketball, during that stretch in the 80s, the year before you became the boys basketball coach, we were a joke of a team, 0-20. We had gotten beat by over 100 points by Montezuma.
And Iowa Valley beat us 120.
Yes.
Well, they beat me or my team 125-30.
Yeah. And so, and I was in there during that stretch, and then, like you were mentioning, the Chad Minster team was a game away from going to state. Just what are your general thoughts during that time frame? Of course, we had, the Pat Carey incident and all that, so it was a pretty tough stretch, so emotionally, I'm sure.
It sure was, and I don't know where to even start with that.
Yeah.
It was building, and it was getting kids to buy in, and to me, the crux of all of it was there in the summertime when that gym had girls playing basketball on one end, boys playing basketball on the other end. We had to have some in the weight room. Some were outside throwing a football. A wrestling mat was rolled out over against the bleachers. And kids just kind of wrote. I mean, it was multi-sport. We weren't going to be just football players. I love seeing your football jacket because everybody had one. It killed the letter jackets, which was too bad because I've got a brand new one at home that somebody never wore once. Well, why do I wear that? I'm wearing my football jacket. So, but it was, I'm a football player year round, but I'm going to play everything else. And the thing with boys basketball was, if you remember, our shooting percentage before Christmas and our shooting percentage after Christmas was significantly different because usually we were in the playoffs in football. We couldn't shoot. Iowa Mennonite would never play us before Christmas or after Christmas. And then all we did at Christmas practices was shoot. And then most of the big wins were after Christmas. But no, and I know when you were playing, I mean, that was tough, and that was Rich Greif and those guys at Montezuma that were winning the state, and we were playing freshmen. I mean, Chris played, and Menster was going to, played, and that was tough, and that's what I'm saying. Iowa Valley beat us 125-37, and I'll never forget that score because when we were seniors playing them up there, they whined because I don't know what we beat them, 75-30. But it just well been 150-10 because they wanted to what you didn't do was try to play physical with Sigourney because that was that was a really tough year because Chris Kaufman blew his knee in a district game at home, and we won that game. We won the big game down against Central Decatur. They were ranked high, beat them. And then we had to play IMS, and we were short a guy. And Menster himself lost 13 pounds that game. He never come out of the game. And I don't know if you can remember that or not, we went into halftime, we were down 4. And they won the state that year, and they didn't have a game closer than 25 at state. Hirschberger and those guys and Schwarzendruber that started at Kansas State. And I told the kids at halftime, I said, guys, I'm sorry. And I says, I ain't Bobby Knight. And I don't know what they're gonna do. They're gonna do something different. They will change their press. They did. They trapped us right over half court, 3 or 4 possessions in a row, and it went from 4 points to 10 points, and we never got it back under that. We just couldn't. And had we had Chris, we would have ripped their press because Menster threw over the top to Chris, and that made a big difference. So anyway, that's my boys basketball thing. Yeah, it was both boys and girls. I was very proud of that. And I think when I left, now I'm sure it's changed now. When I left, I know I was the losingest girls coach in Sigourney history. And when I left, I think I was also the winningest girls coach in Sigourney history. And I think I was the losingest and winningest boys basketball coach too. And I've always been really proud of that. I mean, I can't imagine there's been too many people in the history of the state of Iowa coached more varsity events than I did. And for 25 out of the 27 years, I coached 4 head sports here. Now, we're not going to go into the petition that got ran about having nobody coach more than 2 sports, which maybe solidified me more than anything else because it really lined people up. But it was awesome. And we had 4 classes of boys that never played for anybody else. I hope that they don't look back at that as being, well, that was horrible too. And we were pretty good in football, basketball, baseball, and track during that time. So.
Well, I know, like back when I was in school, Coach, you obviously coached everything, but the one sport you didn't coach was wrestling. You just never had a chance, or
I never wrestled, and I didn't know anything about it. We didn't have wrestling at Madrid, thank God, because Kevin Marshall was a 3-time heavyweight champion from Adel, who was like 6'6" and 380 or 90 pounds, and a national junior college champion, who then, I believe, I shouldn't even say this because maybe he's out. I think he went somewhere for manslaughter, but he was a bad dude, and I played against him in football. He wasn't a great football player, and he didn't like me a lot, and I'm really glad we didn't have wrestling. So he couldn't get to me on the wrestling mat. But no, I didn't know anything about it. I went to a lot of wrestling practices and went with Coach Smith 2 or 3 times up to Gable to watch Gable's practices, and the wrestling mentality. Well, obviously what I didn't like about wrestling, and I still don't like, is the weight cutting, and it's not like it used to be quite as much. That was always tough to be weight training for 7 or 8 months and then dump 30 or 40 pounds. But they were all doing it back then. And now that's kind of not happening now as much. But that, yeah, I didn't coach that. Didn't coach cross country. Didn't coach volleyball. But those are about it or golf. I don't know anything about golf either. But
yeah.
We're,
Any other questions out
yeah,
here?
we're running out of time real quick. We're actually going overtime, but that's all right.
I got one more question for Coach Howard. And I know just being a coach with him and playing, he was one that never, ever talked to the refs, never said nothing. I still got one. I'm still stewing on this one call, and it's the Cooper DeJean punt return. And I just kind of wanted to know your thoughts on that, or did you know that rule? Or
well, it's the rule. If he would have made a fair catch signal, he didn't make fair catch signal. He was doing that everybody else does too. That means the ball's going down. Get out of the way. He didn't. But the fact that, in my opinion, the fact that was on the Minnesota sideline, and all their coaches are chirping at the referee, that probably influenced that call a little bit. It was really hard to believe they did. And when they went into the conference to talk about what it was holding, which they can't even review anyway, and then they come out with that, I'm not going to name drop. I've known Kirk since 1991. I consider him a friend. Now, he's not a great close friend, but when we were here, I used to go up all the time. Coach Stone and I went up to Doyle's weight room a lot, and I've been in Norm Parker's office, been in several times, been in Phil's once, been in Kirk's a bunch. If he's whining about it, it's legitimate, because Kirk Ferentz, and I don't care I'm not going to get into any Iowa stuff, but what he is like in person is just like he is on television. The emotion is real. I mean, a lot of coaches perform on television. He ain't one of them. And in my single opinion here, people ought to really appreciate Kirk Ferentz and what he's done at Iowa, and understand maybe they might want to go back to the name Tom Davis when they're wishing for some big changes. So we're not in the Southeast Conference, and we don't have the recruiting that they do down there. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I thought they got screwed too. So, and I'm not a big. I really debated whether I was going to wear Sigourney Kyoto stuff. And that's kind of rubbing it in, and I feel a little guilty about. So I don't have anything. Literally, I don't have anything that doesn't say Webster City or Sigourney Kyoto. I got 8 great big lawn and leaf bags full that I've never gotten rid of. When I left, I gave Lenny my coat, which was one of the neatest things I think I've ever done. And I'll take credit for that one. I should have gave all the rest of it away too, but I didn't. And now the other day I had a Cobra sweatshirt on, and my son Houston, who is a little Clint, what's that? I said, well, it's the Sigourney Kyoto Cobras, man. Well, why are you wearing that? He says, you're Webster City. I said, well, I'm not now. Everybody says I'm retired. So anyway, I don't have an Iowa shirt. I don't have Iowa State. I root for both of them. Literally, when he fielded that, the Bulldog he was up because he's up here all the time. So he hits the floor because I jump as much as I can. I jumped up, and what God, you fool? but because it was awesome. And then they pulled the plug on the whole thing. So yeah, I think they got screwed on that. And you're right. One of the things I'm proudest of, I've had one 15-yard penalty in my life, and it was my first year at Scranton, and I haven't had one since. And we've beat a bunch of teams while their coaches whined and complained about officials' calls and everything else. And we're playing the next play. One of them right to the west of us. So.
What I'd like to know is, does anybody have the backboard of the bleacher that you used to kick for the girls' basketball games?
Well, the part that I broke got thrown away. And the kicking stopped royally when I forgot, and Chris makes fun of this, and I went to kick, and that board was gone, and I dang near blew an Achilles tendon. Oh. That kind of stopped the kicking a little bit. Yeah, I'm glad that made that big of an impression. And I've had several people comment about, yeah, we sure remember you kicking the bleachers. Well, at least I wasn't directly yelling at a girl. So.
Anybody else, real quick? Nothing? All right. Go on up.
Well, I got to share one quick story. I'm fortunate enough I actually played and coached with Bob. Was up at a Central College football camp or coaches clinic, and I believe the speaker was from Southeast Polk. And Tom Stone, the guy had drawn a play, and Tom Stone says, Bob, I know how to defend that play. And Bob went, well, I'll rip those 15 plays out of the playbook. And the guy looked at Stone and says, well, does he throw a lot? And Stone went, throw? You guys ever watched Howard's team play? He goes, I don't think he knows the forward pass is legal. Everybody talks about the wins, but I'm going to bring up something about a loss you may or may not remember.
I remember all 113 of them really well.
Okay. This was, you guys lost 7-6 to Kyoto.
Yep.
And after the game was over, my dad poked me and says, come on, we're going to go. My dad ran up to him and said, stuck out his hand and said, thank you. Always go for the win. And I remember the look on his face was, what's this old fart want? But that always kind of stuck with me that Dad took the time to do that.
Well, and there's stories with one of the first supporters I had when I got here was Jack Sellers, and one of the first people that came up. And I've always really appreciated the Sellers family and all the other families too. I mean, that's why I hate mentioning anybody. You've got the Hamises here and Ron and the Birds. I mean, I shouldn't mention anybody, but your dad was, and coaching with Jim and all of you. So thank you.
All right, Steve, that kind of wraps up our show. We could probably spend another hour here if we needed. But Coach Howard, thank you for coming down today. Appreciate it. Thanks for everything you did for me and this program, the community, and everything.
Well, I don't want to leave with that, and it's not because he's standing here. I really am so, and the first score, literally, that Clint and I look for after every game was always what's Sigourney Kyoto do. We usually knew it was going to probably be 40 or 50, games, but having kept Sigourney Kyoto program, and Sigourney was great in its own right before I ever got here. Following a state championship wasn't easy, but our demographic started changing here too, and melding Sigourney and Kyoto together and then keeping it together is awesome. And as I told you guys before, there's lots of guys we can mention about that. I assume the Menke kid that's wrestling now, Steve's kid. I mean, that's all. I mean, and lots of but Derek Griner should probably be sitting here, because as far as Sigourney Keota, Derek and Marley, and then of course Mark playing on that first team, they were huge parts of, making it work. And I remember the first parents meeting when I talked, I said, you guys may not care for each other. And I remember a fight in the parking lot second year I was here after a basketball game that we had to have the highway patrolman in here. I said, but if you leave the kids alone, I will dang near guarantee you in 5 years this is going to be one of the biggest powerhouses in the state. It didn't take 5 years. It took about 5 games where it was starting, and having kept it going is awesome. And you look at all the other places that couldn't keep it going because of friction and little petty stuff, and you can blow that all up with social media now so much faster. And I was fortunate to be in a situation where at least there wasn't social media. If somebody was going to complain, they had to come and do it to my face, and there wasn't a whole lot of that, which, right or wrong, and I know what the perception of me by a lot of people was, but that's fine. This is worth everything to me that people still respected it. So thank you very much for this. And like I said, I really had second thoughts about this. It ain't about Bob Howard. It's about Sigourney and Sigourney Keota and all those stories of all the years. And I'll just stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
All righty. Again, this is our special edition of the sports section with Coach Bob Howard here at Brothers Market in Sigourney. And I believe we're going to head across the square here and go to Barnwired in Sigourney for a little social time, some coffee, some cinnamon rolls, whatever they got waiting for us at Barnwired. So we do thank Brothers Market, always hosting, and we'll be back here next week. We'll have, I'm sure, our regular cast of characters and all of our coaches from around the area. We'll be talking basketball and wrestling and bowling and all that good stuff. So again, thank you, Coach Howard. Appreciate you coming in today. And we'll have to do this again sometime down the road. That is our sports section, live from Brothers Market here on Steve Shetler Media.
So if I come back and get my